1.
Hello, this is Father Ed Pelrine from the Archdiocese of Chicago. I'm a faculty member at Mundelein Seminary in Mundelein, Illinois, which is the major seminary of the Archdiocese. And I wanted to talk today about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and in particular to talk about the wedding feast at Cana in John chapter 2. In particular, I wanted to focus on the words of Mary to the servants at the wedding reception. Referring to her son, she said, "Do whatever he tells you." And so I'd like to begin by reading the gospel from the feast of Our Lady of Cana. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. There was a wedding in Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the wedding. And when the wine ran short, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, how does your concern affect me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish ceremonial washings, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told the servers, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then Jesus told them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it. And when the head waiter tasted the water that had become wine, without knowing where it came from, although the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves good wine first, and then when the people have drunk freely, an inferior one, but you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this as the beginning of his signs in Cana in Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples began to believe in him. The Gospel of the Lord. As a way of exploring the wedding feast at Cana and the role of Our Lady at that wedding feast, I decided to look at the Missal of the Masses of the Blessed Virgin Mary, where there actually is a Mass dedicated to Our Lady of Cana, a title that we don't usually hear about Mary, but a very appropriate title. And much of what I'm going to talk about comes from the commentary on the Missal of the Blessed Virgin Mary. This occurs in the 2nd chapter of John's Gospel, so right at the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. In fact, this is the first of the signs that appear in John's Gospel, often called the Book of Signs, where Jesus reveals his identity. And the sign of Cana, that is the changing of water into wine, belongs to the mystery of the manifestation of who Jesus is. In the Roman liturgy in the Church, this is celebrated every year on the Feast of the Epiphany, along with the appearance of the Star of Bethlehem, which leads the Magi to Jesus, and Jesus' will to be baptized by John in the Jordan River in order to bring us salvation. The wedding feast at Cana is also highlighted on the 2nd Sunday in Ordinary Time in Year C in the lectionary, which celebrates this, and I quote, "beginning of signs." And in the communion antiphon of that Mass, we hear these words, "Blessed are you, Blessed Virgin Mary. Through you, your Son gave the first of his signs. The bridegroom prepared the new wine for the bride. Through you, the disciples learned to believe in their Master." The Mass of Our Lady of Cana celebrates together 3 things. The first is the Lordship of Jesus. The second is the Church, as it develops out of the sign of Cana. And the third is the Blessed Virgin Mary. So I thought I would go through those 3 highlights of the Mass of Our Lady of Cana and describe them in a little bit more detail. So first of all, the Mass of Our Lady of Cana celebrates the Lordship of Jesus Christ. And it does this in 5 basic ways. So in this sign of Cana, Jesus is manifesting his glory, and he's revealing himself in 5 ways. The first is as the Messiah, the one promised by God. And indeed, in the preface of this Mass, we read these words: "In this great sign, the presence of the Messiah is proclaimed." The second way that Jesus reveals himself and manifests his glory at the wedding feast of Cana is revealing himself as the Master to whom the disciples give their obedience in faith. In the entrance antiphon of the Mass, we hear these words: "Christ revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him." And in the communion antiphon of the Mass, we hear this: "Through you, Mary, the disciples learned to believe in their Master." The third way that Jesus reveals himself and manifests his glory at the wedding feast of Cana is revealing himself as Lord, whose commands are carried out by his servants. In the preface of this Mass, we hear this: "She turns to her Son for help and tells the servants to do what he commands." The fourth way that Jesus reveals himself is as the new Moses, the author of a new and everlasting covenant. In the first reading of the Mass, which comes from Exodus chapter 19, we hear Moses saying this to the people of Israel: "If you keep my covenant, you will be my special possession, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation." Of course, Moses is speaking for God the Father when he says those words. Jesus, in a new way, is renewing that covenant and fulfilling that covenant. The fifth way that Jesus reveals himself at the wedding feast of Cana is as bridegroom, who will shed his blood for his bride, the church, when blood and water will flow from his pierced side. In the preface of the Mass of Our Lady of Cana, we hear this: "Christ foreshadows the wedding feast. That is his daily gift to his bride. The hour of salvation is foreshadowed when Christ will shed his blood on the cross for his bride." In the Mass, we hear about the banquet, the wedding feast of the Lamb. That's another way of understanding the Mass. The bride is the church. Jesus is the bridegroom who offers his life for his bride. A second theme in the feast of Our Lady of Cana in the Mass for that day is the celebration of the church. The church is revealed again in 5 ways. The first is the community of disciples who follow Christ faithfully. In the post-communion prayer of the Mass, we hear these words: "In imitation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, may we follow Christ faithfully." It's the community that does what Jesus commands. In the collect of the Mass, we hear these words: "Grant that by heeding the words of Christ's mother, we may do what he commands." Notice that Mary's directions are always towards her Son. Thirdly, as a community of disciples, we are to provide for the needs of the community. And the post-communion prayer again says, "In imitation of the Blessed Virgin Mary, may we provide for the needs of the church." Fourth way, what is foreshadowed here is the coming of God's kingdom. And I go again to the post-communion prayer, which prays in unity of mind and heart. Together, they foreshadow the coming of your kingdom. And finally, what is celebrated is the beloved bride, for whom Jesus, the bridegroom, provides the wedding feast. And again, in the preface, the wedding feast that is Christ's daily gift to his bride. The third highlight of the Mass of Our Lady of Cana is that the Mass celebrates the mother of Jesus. Again, there's 4 points here. First of all, the mother of Jesus is chosen by God to play her part in the mystery of salvation. Secondly, she continues to play her part on behalf of the whole church as she reigns in glory in heaven. Thirdly, Mary intercedes for us with her Son. And fourthly, She is present at the Eucharistic wedding feast of the Church. I wanted to talk a bit about a concept that I don't know if many of you have heard of before. That's the concept of Mary as the Queen Mother, or in Hebrew, the Gebirah. So in the Davidic kingdom, the kingdom of David in the Old Testament, the mother of the king always held an official position in the royal court, in which she shared in her son's reign and served as an advocate for the people and a counselor for her son. The Queen Mother was also associated with a key Old Testament text bound up with Israel's messianic hopes. The prophecy of Isaiah 7:14, of which you are all familiar, whether you know it or not, involves the sign of a Queen Mother who will conceive and bear the future Davidic king, Emmanuel, which means God with us. And that's a reading that we'll hear in Advent and in the Christmas season. Just like her Near Eastern neighbors, Israel bestowed great honor upon the mother of the ruling king. The prestigious title Gebirah was used often in the Old Testament to describe the mother of the king. It means mistress, or great lady, or queen. In the Old Testament, as I mentioned, the Gebirah is often used as a title for the mother of the king, never to describe the wife of an Israelite king. And much of this comes from Edward Sree's book about the Queen Mothership of Mary. Matthew, the evangelist, singles out Mary as being with the child when the Magi came to honor the newborn king. Why does Matthew focus on Jesus and Mary and not so much on Joseph at this point? All throughout the narrative in Matthew chapters 1 and 2, Joseph is very prominent, more prominent than Mary. Matthew traces Jesus' genealogy through Joseph. An angel appears to Joseph 3 times. Joseph leads the Holy Family to Egypt from Bethlehem and back to Nazareth. However, in this particular scene of the adoration of the Magi, coming to honor the newborn king, Mary takes center stage. Her mention in this moment, along with the omission of Joseph, underlines that Mary is a person especially important, and that is why she is put in this very high position. So, this link between the royal child and mother, again, may bring to mind the Queen Mother tradition. It is Jesus, the newborn King of the Jews, and Mary then is the mother of the king, the Gebirah, who can be understood as a Queen Mother. All right. So I'd like to move on to maybe a more practical application or a more real-life application of these reflections on who Mary is and what her role was in the wedding feast at Cana. I would note that at Medjugorje, one of the messages of Mary, and I quote her, saying to one of the seers, "I have to pray just like everyone else to the Father." Mary's role as a disciple of Jesus Christ and a beloved daughter of the Father doesn't end when she is assumed into heaven and crowned Queen of Heaven. She continues to be a disciple. She continues to pray to her Heavenly Father. I wanted to talk about 2 real-life examples of Mary's presence in the life of the faithful. One is from a priest friend of mine who gave some testimony about what Mary meant in his own life. This priest was going through a difficult time in his priesthood. In fact, he was considering taking a leave of absence from the priesthood when he had an encounter with Mary. And he himself will testify that he had no devotion to Mary in the seminary or in his early years of priesthood, because devotion to Mary was de-emphasized during those days. But he had an encounter with Mary at this crucial time in his priesthood, and he talks about how special she has been in his life and in his priesthood ever since then. this priest told me how his relationship with Mary and his devotion to her has kept him, as he said, tried and true. That it keeps him away from wrong teaching, keeps him away from separation from Jesus, keeps him away from separation from the church, keeps him tried and true, keeps him faithful. He says without Mary, he fears that he would fall into arrogance and pride. And indeed, he says that Mary asks for prayer and fasting in order to accomplish these things. Mary has been a joy in the life of this priest and has kept him in the priesthood for many years and kept him as a faithful disciple of the Lord. He told me that Mary will show us everything we need for our vocation and everything we need to know for our vocation and to be faithful to that vocation. I wanted to also share my own experience of Mary and how I learned about Mary. And I would say that I learned about Mary is in a great grace in my life from my own mother. And I wanted to quote Mother Elvira, who was the foundress of the Ginocolo community, which works with people who are having problems with addiction, particularly drug addiction. She talks about womanhood and talking about herself as well. She said, every woman has a mother's heart, whether she has biological children or not. My own mother, of course, has many biological children. And one of the great gifts that she gave us as we were growing up was a devotion to Mary and an understanding of who Mary is. Started out as young children, my mother talked about Mary quite often, and she taught us to pray. Particularly, she taught us to pray the rosary. She taught us to pray the memorare, and those prayers were regular parts of our life. We prayed the rosary together as a family regularly. As we became older, my mother announced to us, as brothers and sisters were starting to date and were getting into high school and towards college age, she announced one night that we'd be praying the rosary every night, that everyone who marries in the family would marry a practicing Catholic. And I remember as teenagers, as kind of obnoxious teenagers at the time, we rolled our eyes and we kind of laughed at Mom. But what happened over the intervening years was that everyone who got married in the family married a practicing Catholic. Mom's prayers were answered. We also prayed the rosary whenever we traveled as a family. So when we went on vacation, we prayed the rosary in the car. And we never had an accident. We always arrived safely where we were going. And I thank Mary in part for that safety over the years. One year, we almost had an accident on the highway with a semi-truck. Had we had an accident, it would have been deadly, but we narrowly avoided it, and we had just finished praying the rosary. And my mother said, my sister said, kind of sarcastically, she was a teenager at the time, she said, well, it's a good thing we said the rosary, Mom, because otherwise we probably would have been killed. And my mother said, you're right, and in Thanksgiving that we weren't, we'll say another one. Another way that my mother taught me about the love of Mary and the love of a mother is she would tell us when we were out late at night, when we shouldn't have been out late, when we were probably doing things we shouldn't have been doing. We'd come home, and in the morning, Mom would say, somewhat dramatically, I stormed the heavens all night for you. Or she would say, I walked the floors. I couldn't sleep. I prayed for you all night. And I have no doubt that she did, but the drama kind of added a bit of spice to her story. She taught us that what a mother does is a mother prays for her children. I remember as a pastor, on Marian feasts, I would often ask the women in the parish to raise their hands if they had children. And then if you had children, how many of you pray for your children? And every time I asked that question, every mother in the church said that yes, she prayed for her children regularly. And that's what mothers do. That's what a mother's heart is like. And that's what the heart of Mary is like. No doubt Mary prayed for her son, Jesus, especially as he went through his passion and as he approached the cross, just as she was there to celebrate his resurrection when he rose from the dead. Those are some reflections on the role of Mary at the wedding feast at Cana. So Mary as intercessor, Mary as one who directs everyone to her son, Jesus. Mary, who today we honor. Mary, who says to us, and she says to all Christians, do whatever he tells you.